What if one supplement could make your entire immune system smarter? Not stronger, in an aggressive way, smarter. That's exactly what BWH 85 beta-glucan from BWH Labs does. It works with your immune system, helping it recognize threats, respond effectively, and protect you the way nature intended. BWH Labs has spent over 25 years perfecting the purest, most biologically active beta-glucan on the market, an 85% pure formula that's been tested against 200 competitors and named the most effective immune modulator in peer-reviewed research. The science speaks for itself, just one ingredient, one focus. Unmatched results. Doctors and integrative health practitioners trust BWH 85 beta-glucan, and so do I. It's available in 100 milligrams for daily support or 500 milligrams for maximum immune defense. It's only available through health practitioners, but as an intelligent medicine listener, it's available to you through my full script dispensary. Just go to drhoffman.com/BWH for more information and to order. That's drhoffman.com/BWH. Because a smarter immune system starts with one smart choice. Welcome back to today's Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ronald Hoffman. Today's guest is Dr. Sharad Paul, author of Biohacking Your Genes, 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life. And the book is jam-packed with news you can use about things like the right oils to use, vitamin D, the role of nutrients like folate, and so on. And it's all based on the notion that we can use our genetic findings to inform our lifestyle choices. And that is through a service that Dr. Paul offers called biohackingyourgenes.com. And of interest is that you're a dermatopathologist, right? A skin cancer specialist. And so your interest is, you're kind of a Renaissance man. You have general interest, but specifically about skin. There is something called the dermatogenomics test. That sounds intriguing. What can that, because I get it that there are tests about your cardiovascular risk. There are tests that even inform your risk for dementia. Do you have the ApoE gene and other genes that predispose to dementia? But what can genetics tell us about how we should treat our skin?
Yeah, I think so. How I got into genetic testing itself, like I said to you, was because from working with cancers, we often treat, we test first when we're dealing with cancers, but we don't do it for day-to-day stuff. So I guess we started off by testing for just diet and exercise and lifestyles. And then we realized that there's some people with certain skin predispositions as well. So, for example, some people are more prone to actually getting more UV damage, or some people are more prone to specifically pigmentation. And these are determined by specific genes in your skin. Like some people fundamentally, it's like their skin may naturally age more than other people, right? There are individual variations in that people may have the same amount of sun exposure, but some may. So all this is, we can give people therefore more optimized lifestyle advice, because obviously we can say pigmentation, you probably need to look at, sunscreens, like sunscreens, or you look at
pigmentation is obvious, because you could sort of use the mirror test, what's your shade, your skin color, but maybe there's some things genetically that can inform that. Does that have to do with melanocyte?
That's what I mean. But what I mean is even
genes, melanin genes and things like that?
Yeah, several. And also antioxidant genes, like how you, for example, how you metabolize your vitamin C, for example, right? Because we know that it's not all the same. And people, like some people, don't absorb vitamin C well. So for those people, whatever you're eating in your diet, you're not going to absorb it as well. So there's some people for whom supplements are important. But again, it needs to be targeted, in my view, because if you just keep taking supplements, your body is going to excrete what you don't need anyway. So it just means a lot of it gets wasted. So I think even for supplements, there's some people who particularly need more vitamin C or vitamin D or vitamin E. Mm-hmm. And all these things have a bearing. So we can basically test for like genes to do with skin elasticity. We can do
collagen,
skin aging,
formation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then when I say pigmentation, I didn't mean pigmentation as in general kind of tanning, but even in different skin types, I'm meaning like localized pigmentations. Like, for example, people suddenly developing little patches, there are post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation after injuries or trauma or various things. So some people we know are more prone to it. So it just means that we can optimize their skincare as well. But on the other hand, as a general thing, the supplement thing is really, really important because, again, we're just targeting people. So some people need more magnesium and some people need more vitamin E. So for any of these supplements you're going to take, at least we can optimize it so that you're not just a hit and miss saying, oh, my friend's taking magnesium and he's sleeping better with it, I'm going to try it. Right. It doesn't quite work like that.
Right. And it does offer the prospect of tailored nutrition as opposed to kind of a shotgun approach, as you suggest. So nutrigenomics, which is the science of just, and I've always been intrigued by this notion because, look, different strokes for different folks. There's some patients of mine, some friends of mine who are vegans and they're in superb health. They just thrive with that. And then again, I've met in my practice some vegans who are really misguided. They're in terrible shape and they have this ideological fixation on, no animal cruelty, I won't eat anything with a face, that whole thing. And they absolutely need to include more animal protein and fat in their diets. And conversely, there are people who, the fad these days, carnivore diet, and that's great for some people. They thrive on that, but that may be a minority. Is there a way through genetics, or is this not yet ready for prime time, that we can take people's genetic endowment and discern from that whether they should be vegan or Mediterranean diet or more pro-carnivore? They tried to do it with blood types. I think that was a misguided effort. Eat right for your blood type. Nice try, but not quite ready for prime time.
I think we're pretty close. I'm here really. I think we're ready. We're in prime time. We're just tweaking it all the time. And I think that's something I've done for quite a few years from my previous book, The Genetics of Health. Really, we started doing nutrigenomics testing. And one of the things, definitely the main things you mentioned are ones we can particularly pick, like obviously the things like your glutens, your lactoses, those are, like often it's not intuitive because it becomes a fad. Some people are like, I'm avoiding gluten, but you test them and they actually haven't got the algorithm. And the other thing, as you know, in medicine, there's a whole spectrum of gluten intolerance, right to the more severe end of celiac, where it's actually an immune condition, to more a little. You
can't even have a smidgen of gluten because it's going to set you back. Yeah.
But certainly the protein and fat diets, absolutely, they're genes like the FTO gene, the protein-related genes. They're very, very specific. So we can actually pick the people who will do well on a high-protein diet or who will do well on a high-fat diet, or people who can do poorly on it as well. And then people who, for example, who have a fundamental problem with getting low in iron from the diet itself. So those sort of people, if they're going on a vegan diet or not having animal protein, they are going to have quite a few issues unless they're taking some supplements and things like that. So if you're still of a mindset that you won't eat any of that, then at least we can help them with supplements. So I think 100%, I think that one is a big improvement. Like we can actually pick the people, predict the people, like starch, for example, like who are the people, how will you metabolize starch? So the starch associated gene.
Right. That's interesting too, because there is actually an adaptation that humans have to a greater or lesser extent. It's thought that it was expressed kind of during the agricultural revolution, because humans didn't eat that much starch prior to, quote, the agricultural revolution or civilization. And then they began growing wheat and barley and rice and things like that. And they had to be able to break it down. So they developed the capacity to break the amylase chains into glucose molecules, which are more utilizable. Some people have it, and some people have it to a lesser extent. Is this what you discover when you do genetic testing on people?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same thing, like I mentioned in the previous book, I even tested it's the same thing with dogs and wolves, right? It's an interesting aside. Dogs are just starch-eating wolves, basically. Right? Like wolves can't digest starch.
So they can eat human food to some extent, but...
Yeah, and that's what happened when they started eating. They developed the adaptation to digestive because they were hanging around humans. I tested my dog some time ago when he was alive, and it was literally, dogs have, because he was a Swedish Valiant, very ancient species, more looked like a wolf.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is dogs have genes which can digest starch, but wolves cannot. It's almost like
Wow.
It kills them. And what's interesting is same thing with lactose, right? If you think about milk, see, ancient humans, like you said, you killed animals and you ate them, and you ate some weeds and you ate some leaves and things like that, right?
And you had mother's milk, but you didn't,
That's it. You didn't have anything else. Beyond it, no. So as an adulthood, no adult drank the milk of any other species, right? So it's fundamentally unnatural. If you think about it, no other species drinks as an adult the milk of another species, and which is why significant proportion of us, as we become adults, develop a bit of lactose intolerance. Mm-hmm. But what happened is, this is also from an evolutionary biology point of view, also goes from parts of the Earth where they were hunter-gatherers, like, Far East Asia, Asians, virtually all adults would be lactose intolerant unless proven otherwise, because farming, came out of the Middle East. But
it's not a thing unless maybe you're from Mongolia, where they did use dairy.
Exactly. That's right. Only pockets. But then if you looked at in the Middle East, where dairy came out of originally, it's only very recent. Like, we're talking about 15,000 to 7,000 years. So really, and there was a famine.
With
and
domestication.
So people that's right. And people during a time of famine started domesticating, because people actually who then drank milk because there was nothing else actually died. And then those who survived, so there was like a
natural
evolutionary bottleneck, a natural selection. So the reality, a lot of those genes evolved, but for some of us, we don't know it, because as human beings, we're eating so much stuff which isn't sometimes good for us. They were not intuitive about what's upsetting us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a skin doctor, what I found interesting is, unfortunately, when you have a skin condition, like be it acne or rosacea or whatever, we know that dairy makes it worse, like particularly milk.
Yeah.
Right?
I've noticed that.
Or eczema, or
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. So there's no skin, that kind of pathology, which is not your cancers, but I'm talking about the ones which still distress people a lot. They're coming in with itchy skin, dry skin, eczema, acne, plenty of studies, women, young men, teenagers. So we know that as a skin doctor, you can't say milk is good for your skin, because it isn't anytime you see it in a So, but now at least we can be more specific about it to say, are you somebody who is lactose intolerant or not? Or are you, how much can you manage? Same with your starch, same with your protein. So in fact, that part of, I think, nutrigenomics is quite well evolved, that we can pick the people on what kind of diet they can follow. But also the other thing we've evolved is in the field is quite a lot in exercise testing, like, people who are more suited to endurance exercise, people who are more suited to power exercise, people who have a higher risk of big tendon injuries. Like I remember a few years ago, somebody did the test, and I did think, the name looked a bit familiar. Obviously, I can't mention any names, and then I sent back a report saying that, look, you're at big risk of tendon injuries. So, it's so important to do warm downs, warm ups, and I spend as much time stretching and this and that. And then he was like, I wish I had known this before. He was a tennis pro, and his career was ended by a tendon injury.
Yeah.
And so we can actually pick again in people. So not everyone has the same risk, but whereas you find people who suddenly do their Achilles tendon much more easily than other people. And for people who proper footwear, proper stretches, all these things are important. So I think from that kind of exercise, as well as nutrigenomics, we have evolved a fair bit. I must say that, people who optimize sports performance, especially where there's a lot of funding, they do this for their athletes because they're very well funded. But for common people,
because it's a big investment too, because
that's what
they
I mean.
may do
That's
sort
exactly
of
why.
aptitude testing, like, does this person have the stuff to be a Tour de France cyclist? And there are determinants of whatever the fast twitch or the slow twitch muscles are, genetically predetermined to some extent. I mean, obviously you can train your muscles to overcome some genetic liabilities, but to be at that top 99.9% of performance, genetic testing can actually select which athletes you should invest in.
Yeah, and it's a bit scary, that's true. But because I was asked to be, when I wrote my previous book, I was approached by many such sports bodies, and some of them very well funded, the professional soccer players who earn a lot of money and things like that. And literally, they were trying to pick, at this stage, they're trying to optimize. But actually, some extremes. I remember speaking once to somebody about German Football Federation, and they were still like, could you pick this much earlier at age group level, then we don't have to play them at the other age groups? I'm like,
Exactly.
no, that sounds very much like eugenics. Let's just look at currently the players you've got.
Next, the folks in Las
yeah.
Vegas will be calling you so that you can, help them with their betting lines.
So that has definitely improved a lot, where at least what we've done different now is it's actually accessible to the average person.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's a little bit of investment paying for the test, but it's not like onerous. At least you do a one-off test and you get a good baseline. What's your diet? What is your kind of exercises? What are the kinds of supplements will benefit you? And then you can tailor it around your lifestyle.
And you always qualify it to some extent by saying, look, biology is not destiny. You can overcome, if there's some deficit or some liability. Mostly, these genes are not like the cystic fibrosis gene or the sickle cell gene. They are sort of genes that are more on the throttle rather than a binary thing, all or nothing. And so maybe there's a susceptibility or weakness and you can overcome by taking more vitamin D or more folate, something along those lines. That's how you would approach it.
Fundamentally, because if you think of these genes like protein makers, right? But then you think about it as, like I see your t-shirt saying, join the evolution. So if you look from an evolution point of view, genes evolve for the species, not for the individual, right? So in other words, your genes are loyal to the species, not specifically to you. So if you do things which are not suited to your genetic makeup, then you start making bad proteins, which would be harmful for you. So if you do if you follow a lifestyle which is particularly suited to your own genetic makeup, then you start producing beneficial proteins. So I think that's where these are the ones, like you say, they're not all or nothing, that you don't lack one or you don't have a complete absent gene or pen gene. It's more modifiable. The proteins you produce and the outcomes are modifiable.
Okay, folks, at this point, let's pause and allow one of our sponsors an opportunity to share an important message with you. So here goes. Listen up.
Kids don't just bring home homework, they bring home germs. And those germs don't just stay with them, they spread to the whole household. That's why Clear Nasal Spray was created by a practicing physician to give parents and grandparents peace of mind. You may not think about it, but your nose is filtering out a semi-truck full of air every single day. Clear isn't just another spray. It creates an additional layer of protection in your nose that blocks bacteria and viruses before they can even take hold. Yes, even that virus. Supporting your body's defenses right where germs first try to enter. Clear is a hygiene product recommended for daily use, drug-free, non-drowsy, and safe for all ages. Just a quick spray in the morning and evening helps you cleanse your nose. Don't just hope for protection, create it. Get Clear Nasal Spray, your daily defense. Clear Nasal Spray is available at retailers nationwide and online. Check out Xlear.com for our special offers. That's Xlear.com.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting our sponsors. They, of course, are what make intelligent medicine a continuing free resource to you. And now back to today's guest, Dr. Sherrod Paul. So one issue, a controversial issue in nutrition these days is sodium. There are these guidelines like everybody should have less than 1.5 milligrams of sodium per day. But then it turns out that some people do better with a little more sodium. Maybe it has to do with lifestyle. They're sweating more, but maybe it's a genetic thing. Can you determine from genetics whether people are going to be very salt sensitive? Is there a way of doing that?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do. In the testing we test both, salt sensitivity as well as the salt retaining gene, which is the one which increases your risk.
ACE?
Right. Yeah, that's right. And that's why your blood pressure pills are called ACE inhibitors, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the reason. And actually the interesting thing about it, and particularly from the US context, was when, of course, with the history of people, especially in African Americans who came to the US during the slave trading days and things like that, there was an artificial selection of people,
yes.
Right? Because they were living among themselves, so there was not the same genetic pool mix. So what was interesting when we looked at studies is the African Americans have a much more salt retaining gene than Africans as a pool, because there's a much more wider genetic pool. So therefore, they're actually much higher risk in general if you're consuming processed foods or
Right.
salty foods but we can pick it at an individual level. So absolutely, like I tested myself, and actually I have a salt retaining gene. So I should be one like following the recommendation, not having too much salt.
Mhm.
I guess, the other problem with modern lifestyles compared to before is we know that salt is a preservative. So anything you're buying out of a packet has added salt more than you need, right?
Mhm.
Just to preserve it. So I guess, and the same thing, the other thing with sugar is we know that if you make things caffeinated, you can then add more sugar. So we add sugar beyond we need it so that it becomes habitual. So these companies are very clever in the sense the caffeinated drinks have more sugar than you would tolerate if they weren't caffeinated. But they're at a level where you actually then do get addicted to them. But the interesting thing with the salt is the way to look at it is anything which prolongs the shelf life of a product artificially, right, reduces your shelf life.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point. That's a good way of looking at
So
it.
I think the key to looking at it is the more you eat fresh or the more you cook yourself, the less added salt. Because if you are actually, to be honest, if you are cooking and you're adding a little bit of salt and you're cooking for taste, very unlikely you will be exceeding the massive doses. The problem happens is the moment you open a packet or
It's that stealth,
soup,
salt that is,
Right.
unbeknownst to you, it's there. Is there a way to ascertain whether people are more sugar sensitive or carbohydrate sensitive? Is that
absolutely.
something that's
We do that
attainable?
as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's definitely not only we can not only test that, but we can also test three parts there. One is you can test your sugar preference, which of course you may already know, like, whether you've got a sweet tooth or not.
Right.
And it's
And
only
some people,
helpful if you're a
they
younger
actually can
child.
kind of, they're kind of diffident about sugar, which is, I think those are the outliers, and they really don't care for it
And so
that
there
much.
is a sugar preference gene, but both sugar and salt, we know that have to do with childhood. Like if you're at a younger age, if you're exposed to these foods, then you tend to actually prefer them when you're older.
Interesting. You're a big fan, by the way, of olive oil. You extol its benefits. What's so great about olive oil, and why should we be increasing our intake?
Olive oil is like incredible. Like that's another thing which was a little bit of a surprise. No, we always knew olive oil was healthy, but it was particularly, the other benefits beyond just the anti-inflammatory benefits, beyond its normal polyphenols and tyrosols and everything else. It was basically, it's just huge. So I just think, look, and the other thing which surprised me was when I looked into studies that I always thought, because we're always told olive oil, we know that doesn't function well at a high boiling point, and so therefore it's not so good for frying and everything else. But if you're using extra virgin olive oil, but what's interesting is even then it doesn't produce trans fats like the other artificial, fats do. So olive oil particularly, I think, is a superfood in itself. Normally for humans, it's not natural for us to eat any oils, right? But I think olives in general are good. And then from that, I guess, pressing the olives just naturally and getting the olive oil. So that's partly, I think, why the Mediterranean diet does so well, both for cardiovascular risk and also lower dementia and things like that, because olive oil has a big part to play, and it also has good anti-inflammatory benefits as well as antioxidant.
So it's not just the monounsaturated fat, because what they've tried to do is they've tried to say, canola oil is the same as olive oil. It's more economical, and we can make tons of it, and it's a monounsaturated fat. But there's other things in olive oil, chemicals like hydroxytyrosol, and you point out oleocanthal. I'm not even sure what those things exactly do, but you extol their virtues in your book.
Yeah, particularly the oleocanthal is directly related to your anti-inflammatory effect. And in fact, I was very interested in the story I put in the book about the guy who was involved in making like paracetamol or your Tylenol, and they were asked to make a lemony drink. I don't know if you get in England or New Zealand, Australia, like the Anglosphere countries outside the US, we have a drink called Lemsip, which is very popular when people have fevers or colds, and it's basically lemon drink like a hot lemon drink with paracetamol, which
is like acetaminophen,
right?
which is like Tylenol.
Yes, exactly, pretty much, yeah. But what they said is when they were asked to add an anti-inflammatory into it, they found that it made it too bitter, and then they could not get the taste. So they essentially just had paracetamol. But what was interesting is these guys then travel to Italy, and they're at an olive oil tasting place, and they're tasting the different ones, and they go to a place which has the most potent extra virgin olive oil. And one of the guys is given to drink, and his friend says to him, "Why the hell did you put Tylenol in it?" Because he was used to tasting it in the lab. And in fact, not Tylenol, but the anti-inflammatory, because they tried and failed. And he said, "Why did you carry with you?"
Motrin or
He was
or
like ibuprofen.
Ibuprofen,
Yeah. And they were like, "Why the hell did you put that in there?" And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" And he goes, "It tastes the same." So they thought that is interesting. So they came back and they tested it, and they found that it had the same almost level of anti-inflammatory action as an ibuprofen. So,
wow.
And that was in the oleocanthal, which was only like, it's very small portion. It's about 2% or less of olive oil content, but that still has a great benefit. So like you say, it's not just the monounsaturated or the fact that it's, not animal fat and all that, but it's actually the fact that it's got a lot of other benefits. I think, yeah, that's something which was even surprising, that the added benefits beyond what I already knew.
Indeed. Okay, so lots of great information in the book, Biohacking Your Genes, 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life. Do you have some tips for skin health? What are some of the things we should be doing? Is there anything we should be smearing on our skin? Anything we should be avoiding?
I think, like from a diet point of view, I think, like I said earlier, personally, I think milk as an adult is no good for your skin. Right. And the more fermented something is, the little better it is. So if you love your dairy, then the more fermented the cheese, like your parmesans or whatever, they're not as bad.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, yogurt is okay because it's a probiotic, so that kind of stuff. And too much sugar.
Unless it's low-fat yogurt, in which case they put tons of emulsifiers and chemicals to plump it up to substitute for the fat, which they've taken out.
Yeah, that's right. Unless you make the traditional way. And the other thing would be too much sugar, which is no good for skin because of glycation, because pigmentation. From a skin cancer point of view,
let's double click on that. AGES, which is a great acronym because it's kind of a double entendre.
Advanced glycation end products.
They do age you. What are the ages? What's the relationship between sugar and ages?
Yeah, it's essentially like, glycation of hemoglobin, like what we test, glycated hemoglobin when testing for diabetes and things like that. But similarly, at a skin level, there's glycation at a cellular level, which then increases your pigmentation and various things. So it ages you in the sense like wrinkling, sagging, and pigmentation. Yeah. And so what we've found is that I guess particularly, again, stress management. So if you looked at the NRF2 pathway at a cellular level, the antioxidant pathway, what's interesting to skin is the same pathways implicated in aging are implicated in chronic stress, physical stress, and too much sugar. So in other words, if you are carrying an injury which you're not treating, or if you're in an abusive relationship or whatever, you tend to also age more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the other thing from a skin point of view, if you're fair-skinned, the thing which will lead to skin cancer is you getting sunburnt. So the most important thing is not getting sunburnt. Right. Beyond it, then it's your choice as to how much sun exposure. And if you're an outdoorsy person, look, down under here are UV so high in Australia and New Zealand, right?
That's the thing, is that the skin cancer rates are soaring. Yeah. Number one, because we're dealing with a kind of an Anglo-Saxon population.
Exactly. It wasn't designed to live in a Pacific island, right? Our Pacific islands down here. So the skin here is generally darker. So I think because of it, we have generally sunscreen is like a part of life for people. So in which case my preference is always the mineral sunscreens, because like I said, they have actually form a film on the
with
top.
Zinc or titanium, right?
With the zinc and titanium are the only two approved by FDA in the US. And so I think those are the ones I would generally recommend, because then they're safe, worrying too much about absorption, things like that. But I think outside that, like we mentioned, the things in the diet, particularly too much sugar, alcohol, of course, right? Too much alcohol. Like that's because alcohol is, as you know, when we cut anything out for pathology, how do we dehydrate skin to test it in series of more concentrated alcohol, right?
Wow.
So before I chop something up and look in the microscope, we're putting series of different, 70% alcohols, and then it completely gets waxy. I guess the reality is, so if you think about it, is if you drink too much, it's a myth that drinking is good for you. I mean, the occasional drink, yes, is fine. And of course, red wine does have resveratrol. White wines have more acetaldehyde content, so it's not as good. So generally, there is some nuances there. But generally, as a general rule, you can't say that drinking every day is good for you, right? And so you always need days off of it. And you also want to not exceed, 1 or 2 drinks. Because the problem is people then tend to drink too much or they binge drink. And so those kind of things, again, from a skin point of view, it's a best known dehydrating agent in the lab. So it's, of course, going to dehydrate you as well.
Indeed. And, finally, you actually have a section of the book where you talk about biohacking your mood. Is there a relationship between genes and predisposition to stress or depression? And, is there, if you're cognizant of that, can you take preventive measures?
Yes, I think it's just so certainly in the testing we can test for your anxiety genes, as well as anxiety when it's related to certain foods. Like I said, caffeine and anxiety has a specific genetic part to it. And I guess if you are more prone, or then you have a family history, like which you would know, then being more proactive and trying to manage your mental health is good. Like, so I've just put some actionable steps there. But the reality is, as with anything, it's like we go to the gym to train a body. You can literally train your mind to overcome these things. But I think, speaking of surprises, when in my research over the years, the biggest surprise that I found was in skin biopsies or skin excisions, which we cut things out. When studies are done between optimists and pessimists, the optimists actually heal faster. I mean, that was something which I never thought. Like, obviously, we know that in chronic diseases, we know that the more positive you are, you do better. But I didn't actually think, to be honest, it would make such a difference for an acute kind of a little wound you are creating.
I'm very happy to say that I'm a very fast healer. I'll cut myself, or I'll, stub my toe, and it'll be like, 48 hours later, it'll be like, it's all gone. So I guess.
So you're probably a positive person as well. So what is quite interesting is so in those people, of course, then it's things like, visualization, being intentional about like meditation or journaling, gratitude, surrounding yourself with people who are optimists, understanding, the root cause of it and reinforcing it by, when you're feeling down, doing activities which, make you laugh or fun. So all that kind of actionable tips, particularly if you have a higher risk, then it's particularly more important.
Okay, great. So final note, the book is Biohacking Your Genes, 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life. It came out just at the end of last year, and it's still available, and you can get it from the usual sources. And your genetic test is available in the U.S. because you're New Zealand
very
based.
Much so. Yeah.
Okay, so it's licensed and available, and it's direct to consumer. So the place to go is biohackingyourgenes.com. And it's self-explanatory. In other words, it comes not just with, here's your results, go figure it out. There's a narrative that's associated with that with explanations and suggestions. Okay. So good stuff. Well, thanks for joining us today. It was very informative, and I think people can glean a lot if they read your book, Biohacking Your Genes. Our guest, Dr. Sharad Paul. Dr. Paul, congratulations. Keep up the great work. And thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
It's my great pleasure.
Go well.
I'm Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and this is the Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I want to thank you for listening to the Intelligent Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app, and get new episodes automatically downloaded every weekday. And please give us a rating and review. It truly helps new people discover intelligent medicine. The Intelligent Medicine Podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Finally, please visit drhoffman.com and discover everything Intelligent Medicine has to offer, including frequently updated, unbiased health news and fully vetted product and supplement recommendations. You're listening to Intelligent Medicine, a resource to help you take control of your health. We offer a balanced, objective analysis of all your health, wellness, and aging options, both conventional and alternative. Now you can take your engagement to the next level by joining FullScript. FullScript is my online dispensing platform that only offers curated, professional-grade supplement brands that I know and trust. Never counterfeit or expired, always stored and shipped correctly. Just go to drhoffmanstore.com for more information and to start your free FullScript account. Buying through FullScript offers fast, free shipping, optional refill reminders, a mobile-friendly site. It's safe, secure, and HIPAA compliant and offers world-class support. Just go to drhoffmanstore.com. You'll get access to the supplements and features you need to help you achieve your wellness goals, including my custom targeted protocols that combine the products I recommend to address specific needs, heart health, immune support, and much more. It's all at drhoffmanstore.com. drhoffmanstore.com.